Yeah, so I think when you think about the time and cost for each of them, it's hard to answer that question without a little bit of background, right? Like, what are we talking about? But in general, I would say the time is almost negligible, right? I think if the reagents are available, it's a couple months to develop the method and a couple months to validate, or a month to validate the method, really. And then the cost, I believe, is somewhat similar between platforms. The LBA platform and the hybrid mass spec platform, for us, we can make those costs kind of equivalent. But what Don alluded to is, it really is, it's almost two methods on the hybrid side, because you got that front end amino capture piece and then the mass spec piece. And they can have some efficiencies with development and validation, but when we go to do sample analysis, it's typically a little bit more costly to run the samples. But overall, I think this, and you can add how you feel, Don, but overall the time and the cost for development and validation is maybe it's a little bit higher on the hybrid mass spec side, but nothing more than maybe 10, 15, 20% range. Well, the price per sample sometimes can be almost, 50 to 75% more.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky question because it depends on what we're talking about, right? So cost, well, I'll start with time. If we start with time, a lot of times where mass spec comes in faster, and maybe not hybrid, but mass spec in general, is when there are no reagents. When there's no reagents, it's going to take a minimum of 3 months to 6 months to get a reagent. Sometimes you don't have time for that.
That's very true.
So there's still methods you can do on the mass spec, even in the large molecule side, that may or may not need a perfect reagent. Again, you could use a receptor, you use whatever, and you can get a mass spec based method early, and then you might pivot to LBA when those other reagents become available. So there's a big time impact there. And then, like, when we look at something like a generic LCMS assay versus a generic LBA assay, again, we have a very good platform for generic LCMS. So we do 1 to 2 days of method development, and then we're into sample analysis. And I think you guys are a little bit longer.
It's similar, but when she says generic, it's like monoclonal antibodies, right? So drugs that are monoclonal antibodies, you can do generic assays where we have those methods ready to go. It might take you a day or two, but on the LBA side, sometimes it does take a couple, 3 days. It's not. To me, it's a negligible amount.
Sure.
But what to hammer home to you, that's actually a really, again, another feature about KCS that really separates us. We have generic assays for monoclonal antibodies that, they're both very sensitive, they're both robust, and we do a fair amount on each of those platforms. So if you sometimes it makes sense to do it by mass spec just because the lead time might be longer on the LBA side, or capacity over here. So that gives us a lot of flexibility as an organization to solve the problem.
Yeah, and for cost, again, when you were saying they're similar, I think in that small study, like what we call minimum batch, maybe 50, 100 samples, 150 samples, something like that, the costs are very comparable.
Yeah.
When we get into 1,000 sample study, then, like you said, the price per sample for mass spec, because it takes many times 2 days to prep it and run for like another day, it's a lot of instrument time. It's a lot of, so the cost might be, like you said, 70% higher, whatever, like twice almost sometimes.
But usually in those more complex assays, it's still, the ligand binding assay cost goes up too, because we're talking about costs that are usually just a day.
Yeah.
There are some LBA methods that take a couple days
Sure.
to do, and those costs are going to rival what the LBA price is too.
Yeah.
So, sorry, what the hybrid price would be for that. So I mean, it's a hard question to kind of unpack, but I think overall we try to make it work within whatever budget makes sense for you. But that sample analysis piece does tend to
and at the end of the day, when you have a large study that's going by LCMS or hybrid LCMS, it's probably because that's your only choice.
Yeah.
So you don't really have a choice, but at least you have a choice. Because in other places, you don't have no assay. You don't have anything.
No, and we could share probably half dozen scenarios where there was no choice and the hybrid did solve the problem.